Trying to get home to stream that highly anticipated series finale? Well, it may take longer with T-Mobile 5G home internet. You could be stuck with slower speeds during the busiest hours because you share your network with cell phone users. Why deal with that? Switch to Cox Internet with 2 times faster download speeds than T-Mobile 5G home internet during peak hours. Plus, Cox offers free panoramic Wi-Fi equipment and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Why not switch? Visit cox.com/5G home for details. T-Mobile prioritizes certain T-Mobile phone users over home internet users during times of congestion.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
You're in the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
So I think with our new network situation, Tim Swartz, we are improving or declining depending on your point of view. But I actually heard ads today on the show for McDonald's. Can you imagine that? Really?
Wow. That's impressive.
We did.
Vegan over there?
Unfortunately, they do not, as far as I know. I guess you can have things like, can you have potatoes if you're vegan?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I suppose it all depends what they're fried in. They're fried in lard.
Well, that's a point, actually, Tim. Yeah, that's a point, because Burger King, McDonald's, these big chains, KFC, they all do vegan over here, but I think they're not succeeding because they don't fry them separately. And that has been in the press lately.
Well, it's a matter of getting as much product out there as cheaply as possible and to keep the prices and increases down. Of course, what we learn more and more about the current, I don't want to get into politics more than this, the current situation with prices going up is that big corporations take advantage and say, oh, the price is up 1%, I'll increase my prices 3%.
That sounds likely. It's just the same over in Europe. Britain is in Europe, by the way, still.
Right. They made a yeoman effort there to get out of it, though.
No, we didn't. Some people did. The friends of your Donald did. But it was a very narrow thing, and it's done a lot of damage over here in Britain. We're now smaller, less connected, not as wealthy, not as influential. It was a disaster. Hey, but we're not here to talk contemporary politics.
There you go.
Right. We're here to talk about spiritualism and all that good stuff. And I guess we should first look at your history, your background, and see how you got into this. You got into this, I gather, at the age of 12. And it's so interesting that people who start studying the strange and unknown, it's preteen, just preteen, that they get going.
Oh, right. Is that you find that? It was in my family over in Britain up to 1951. It was illegal to be a medium. It was okay to be a church, but it was illegal to be a medium. That you had those contradictions. So it was quite hush-hush. And in my family, my grandmother and her cousin used to go to the Spiritualist church. I was born in North Yorkshire, but in the northern part of North Yorkshire, Middlesbrough. There was a Spiritualist church there, and they were members there, and they would go to the spirits. And it was all hush-hush and very secretive and quiet, And it wasn't talked about in the family, but it was, how can you say, it was known about in some mysterious way. My father died when I was just 12. My mother went to sit with mediums. I went to a Spiritualist church probably at the age of 14, the local church. And my best friend at school, who we're still friends now, he remembers my going. It was all very weird. Why on earth is he going there? And there was all these old ladies sitting on the platform talking about dead red Indians. It was so weird. But they said, you will come back to this many years' time. And of course I did. And it's been with me ever since. I think I was always intuitive. I was always listening to what my heart was telling me. So I guess I've always fared pretty well with spirit's advice. But yes, it was in my family in that way. And then I met my partner many years later, in 1981, in fact, 43 years ago. He's very spiritual. He was very interested in these things. And we got involved in London. We went to meetings there and one thing and another. You know, we were attendees, you would say. And after some years, we moved to York in 1988, which is obviously the capital of Yorkshire. And we became involved with the local spiritualist group here, who didn't have a home at that time, but they did have a building fund. And I became secretary. And through that, we were able to buy our own church building, which still exists as the York Spiritualist Centre. And I was secretary and president, and I've been involved ever since. But I also have a degree in sociology from the London School of Economics. So I was always interested in the history and the sociology of spiritualism as well. So those things kind of combined to make me into a writer. And I've written 6 books, mostly on American spiritualism, because it's a new, relatively, well, in the sense that 20th century American spiritualism is a relatively new field which is just opening up, because it wasn't digitized till fairly recently. So research was pretty difficult. You had to get to original sources. And of course, unless you can go to Lilydale or Chesterfield or Casadega in Florida, that was difficult. So there wasn't a lot of avenues open, but the internet, the digital revolution, opened that field up. I'll give you for an example. I love antiques. And one year I found a cache of letters from a woman who had married, a Yorkshire woman who had married a man and moved to New England, where in the early 1830s, 40s, had founded the brass industry in New England. And she'd experienced the American Civil War there, and she'd kept the letters that she wrote, which had been returned to her, and the letters that she'd received. This was a wonderful cache of letters about this family in the experiences of the American Civil War in New England. But in the 1990s, you couldn't research that. In fact, I sold them for £250, and they went to an American buyer whom I hope has done Leah Holmes justice in researching them, and there was a wonderful book in it. But it shows you the difference between the 1990s and what you could do at the end of the 2010s. The research fields just weren't open. You just couldn't do research in America unless you were in America, unless you were in the right state at the right archive. There we go, Gene.
Ha 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 ha. When I look at spiritualism, I think you're going to mediums. Am I wrong?
Yeah, well, no, I guess not. No. Communication via mediums is the thing, isn't it? Yeah. It's about personal development, though, isn't it? I mean, spiritualism has many aspects to it, but one of them is teaching and training, teaching the spiritual side, training the mediumistic side, and developing communication with the other world. Mm-hmm. You've been to Scottsdale? You sat with David Thompson?
Have you, Tim?
Have you, Tim?
I've been to Camp Chesterfield.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Yeah, I grew up really close to Camp Chesterfield, so I've been there a number of times, and but never attended any kind of sessions at Camp Chesterfield. Other places, but never Camp Chesterfield. Strangely.
Oh, yeah. I got a white robinet as the name at Camp Chesterfield.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been there.
We have friends who know Tom Newman, in fact, who I emailed you about the other day.
Right.
And Hoyt Robinet materialize or precipitates images onto card with messages and names on the backs of them.
We're going to break with Gerald, and Gene and Tim, you're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery,
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
It's sleeveless season. You diet, you work your tries, but you're still not ready. Stubborn fat used to be a challenge before AirSculpt, a minimally invasive procedure developed by a celebrity cosmetic surgeon over a decade ago. This innovative method permanently removes stubborn fat from chin to ankle without needles, scalpels, or stitches. Be your best self in less than 48 hours. Want all the right curves in all the right places? Visit airsculpt.com/iHeart to book an in-person or virtual consultation.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our famous Paracast community forums at forum.theparacast.com.
When we talk about mediums and such, are we thinking the same thing about a company, for example, which we will not mention in any complimentary way, a company in California that has psychics? This is a psychic, a medium, or what?
A medium can be a psychic because they can read the body language. Conventionally speaking, a psychic is not a medium because they're not communicating with the spirit world. But a good psychic reader is quite a good experience, and they can, because what they're doing is reading your energy, and it's not necessarily a negative thing. They can actually be, quite intuitive as well, and come up with perceptions that perhaps you hadn't realized. A medium specifically is able to contact or be contacted by the spirit world. And that's the difference in that it's kind of like an energy thing. The spirit level is a much faster vibration than the more heavier psychic energy, and a good medium can switch between the two. A good medium will give you substantial details of people whom you've known in spirit. They'll be able to channel your helpers and advisors and master teachers who are around you. It's a broader experience. Does that make sense? Nowadays, there are less physical mediums about. My research field is specifically the 20th century, between, let's say 1988 back to 1918. American spiritualism was characterized by physical mediumship. In my book, number is it? Number 3, my third book, Psychic Observers, I list 197 physical mediums who were capable of independent direct voice and trumpet phenomena. Independent direct voice is where an individual spirit will speak directly to you through a materialized voice box, or they will use the trumpet as a megaphone, which they're able to project their voice. It was, I mean, this was just so common. And I met a woman out, Sally Hayden von Conter, in New Mexico, and she said it was all physical then. It was all physical, you know. Well, it wasn't the case in Britain like that, but in America, physical phenomena was the order of the day, and it's all died away, and it's difficult to explain why. But going back to your original point, a psychic will not be able to materialize a direct voice or a trumpet phenomena in that way. My background is in physical mediumship. When I became secretary and later president at the York Church, York in North Yorkshire, I was able to bring in lots of different types of mediumship. And we focused on a whole gamut. Yeah. So in the York Church, which I became secretary and subsequently president of, we were able to host the physical mediums of today, which was David Thompson, who now lives in New Zealand, Stuart Alexander, Bill Meadows, who died recently, and who else? Various other people, but it's a very rare phenomena these days. And in America, I think there's a guy called Warfield Moose, who I've not experienced, Steve Woods, Hoyt Robinette out at Camp Chesterfield, and I don't know of any others. Kai Muger in Germany has a reputation of being a genuine physical medium, but it is pretty rare. And basically, those kinds of mediumships have died away. The greatest physical mediumship now, I would say, was David Thompson in New Zealand. I was lucky as secretary at the time in the year 2000 to be able to book him. And he came to York with his then partner. Of course, we knew this guy's reputation, but these were his first steps into public demonstration. And there was 25 of us. We blacked out the room, and it was so powerful. Oh my God! I mean, we had a carpeted floor, which we put a board down on the floor, and people had known, like our friend of ours, Stan. His father materialized and brought his dog with him. And then at one point, a Native American materialized and did a peace dance on this board. And you could hear, I mean, it was just so powerful. The energy was extraordinary. And David can materialize voices and people and individuals in a way that is now very rare indeed. This guy is the Wizard of Oz. He goes to Stockdale, or he did to the Afterlife conference there in Arizona. If you ever get the chance, you make sure you go. Who else is there? I hear of Kai Muger, who's a German, but I haven't actually sat with him. These are contemporary people. These are people who are still alive. And he kind of hyperventilates to get into that physical state of manifestation. And it's quite powerful, I believe, so I'm told. The other 30 years ago, we started our relationship with Stuart Alexander, who's a physical medium who lives in Yorkshire, 40 miles from outside of York, and we host him. And his physical phenomena is extraordinary. Years ago, I remember we took an elderly friend of ours, Kath Humphreys, who was an immaculate. She always looks absolutely immaculate. We took her to the seance with Stuart, and Dr. Barnett materialized. And Dr. Barnett was very shaky. He was almost like he had a palsy. And he took hold of her head, and he more or less destroyed her permanent wave, you know. And she was more upset by her hair being mussed up than she was about the materialization of this doctor figure. And we've known two figures at once materialize, Frida and Dr. Barnett walking around in the circle, talking to people and touching hands. With David Thompson, we've I remember we have a close friend of ours, Margaret Hodge, and she had a father, and she subsequently had a stepfather, and she talked to both of them subsequently, one after the other, at a David Thompson seance. There was another guy, Scott Milligan, who's also a physical medium. And my mother died in 2013. And I think it was about 2016 or so, we had a Christmas seance. In the way of these things, people have parallel lives, and there was myself and another woman, and it could have been for her, it could have been for me. And the guide came through, Scott's guide came through, and he said, and he gave my childhood address, which was School Close. Well, even my partner of 43 years couldn't name the street where I lived when I was a boy. And sure enough, my mother came through and we had a conversation. Those kind of things, those kind of experiences change your life. We also sat with Colin Fry, who became a television medium subsequently, but he was a wonderful physical medium. And we had many wonderful occasions with maybe groups of 25, 30 people in which the spirits materialize and we converse and we were touched by them, you know. Can you still hear me all right?
You are coming in loud and clear. We're talking about spiritualism, mediums, all that strange stuff.
It's very normal. It's when you're there, it's a great party. There's nothing spooky. There's nothing spooky about it.
Gerald, Tim, Gene, you're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
It's sleeveless season. It's time to reach your body goals and achieve the shape you've always wanted, all thanks to this minimally invasive procedure that uses no needles, no scalpels, and no stitches. With AirSculpt, you can permanently remove that stubborn body fat anywhere in your body and be back to your daily routine in no time. Get ready to conquer the summer. Visit airsculpt.com/iHeart to book your complimentary virtual or in-person consultation now. That's airsculpt.com/iHeart.
Hi, this is James Fox, Director of the Phenomenon and Moment of Contact. You're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So, Gerald, you're talking about going to a seance here. That's very normal, very pleasant, that sort of thing.
It is absolutely. It's a very natural experience when you're there. I don't know, after it, you feel like you've been to a wonderful occasion, a great party. But America had such wonderful mediums like Ethel Post Parrish. I've written a series of books called Mediumship in America, which are available through Amazon. The series looks at mediumship through the 20th century in America. And as I was saying earlier, this is an underdeveloped area of research. And everything I do, I've written 6 books in total, 2 on British subjects. But everything I do is based on original research. So everything you're going to read is brand new stuff. Ethel Post Parrish, which was my 3rd book, was born in Reading in Pennsylvania. She was a wonderful materialization medium. I beg your pardon. She was born in Indiana. I'm thinking of Dorothy Graf Flexer, the subject of my first book. She moved to Pennsylvania outside of Reading, and she founded in 1932 Camp Silver Bell. And she's known as a materialization medium. She was brought up, raised literally, in Camp Chesterfield, and she married Myron Post, who was her third husband, in 1916. He became president, I think, in 1924, and they stayed there till 1928, when they left for Florida and started a church down in Miami. But if you're a materializing medium, the humidity is off the scale, as you well know. It's off the scale in Florida. And a couple who had visited from Pennsylvania, Reading, offered her accommodation at a campsite outside of Ephrata in Pennsylvania. And it was a gift to Ethel. And she founded Camp Silver Bell there in 1932, which ran up to about 1988. The book is available on Amazon, as I say, as the entire sequence of 4 books are. I discovered, I got to know friends in Sarasota in Florida at the Sarasota Center of Light, Reverend Tom Newman, whom I mentioned to Tim the other day. They invited us to come over, and I subsequently wrote the biography of Reverend Dorothy Graf Flexer. Dorothy Graf Flexer she was born in Reading, Pennsylvania, and Dorothy trained with Ethel Post Parrish at Camp Silver Bell, which was like 20 miles away. And Dorothy developed independent direct voice and trumpet mediumship and materialization. She gave up materialization subsequently at the end of the 1950s, say, but she was known as a wonderful materialization medium. And she founded churches in Florida, in Tampa, and in Sarasota. They were called the Church of Metaphysical Christianity, with obviously a Christian emphasis. Dorothy practiced trumpet and direct voice classes, as they're known in the States, from 1946 right through to her death in 1996. So she was influential on many people, and she was devoted to the community that she started. So the first book that I wrote, I Come to the Garden, which is taken from her favorite hymn, At the Garden, is actually a study in community, because the difference in America is that you have spiritualist communities. In the United Kingdom, which is a much smaller country than the United States, residential communities, say of Mormons or golfing people, or people who want to retire and don't want to have children around them, those kind of communities, socialist communities, utopian communities, they haven't really taken off because there simply isn't the space. Whereas in America, you can retire to a community of your own choosing and live as you want amongst people who share your common interest. And of course, in America, there were many spiritualist communities, as there were of other types of groups, such as the Mormons. But I catalogued in Psychic Observers, which is the third book, I think it was 78 spiritualist communities between 1870 and the present. And I believe still there are 11 still in existence at today, including, of course, Camp Chesterfield in Indiana and Cassadaga and Lilydale and various others, New Harmony up in Maine and those kind of places. I've lost my trail.
Camp Lilydale is probably the most famous currently in the United States. Still.
It is. Have you been?
No, I've never been.
Oh, okay.
But we had an author on about a little bit more than a year ago, who wrote, who did an excellent book, Shannon Taggart. I don't know if you're familiar with her and her book Seance, but it's more, it's a photography book mostly. And she started out more as like a skeptical agnostic, and then after traveling to Lilydale and Chesterfield and some of these other ones, taking photographs, she became a believer just because of what she saw and what she photographed. Yeah, if you haven't read across this book, I highly recommend it to you.
So what was the title again, Tim?
Seance.
Okay, and it's by
Shannon Taggart.
Shannon Taggart. Oh, I shall investigate it.
Yep.
I have been to Lilydale, and I got to know Ron Nagy there. You know, he runs the museum. What, for me as a researcher, what the real breakthrough was going to Lilydale. And Ron has bound copies of a lot of newspapers. For example, Dale News. Dale News was published, 1934 up to about 1940. The actual end date is in dispute. But he has a fantastic library there. The other, in terms of research, the real breakthrough came when Professor Todd J. Leonard, who's out in Japan, who lives in Japan now as a professor of English, he had the University at Indianapolis digitize the archives of Camp Chesterfield. These are the minute books. These are the hotel registers. These are the account books. This is an extraordinary resource of research because they're dated 1917, I think. Oh, no. Well, the accounts are 1917 through to 1947. But some of the minute books for the meetings of the boards of both of Chesterfield and of the association, the Indiana Spiritualist Association, they go back to the late 1890s. This is the only record that I know of contemporary sources of information like that. They were kept in 1908. My last book, which was Spiritualism Scandal, deals with a scandal at Chesterfield in 1960.
Let's stop here. Scandal in 1960. I want to hear about that, okay? Not that I want to hear about stuff that's scandal, but, you know, scandals are interesting sometimes. Gerald, Gene, and Tim, we'll find out what they are. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Sun's out, body out. No matter how many push-ups or macros you count, sometimes stubborn fat won't budge. And weight loss meds may help you lose weight, but won't get your ideal shape. Enter Air Sculpt. Minimally invasive Air Sculpt permanently removes fat without needles, scalpels, or stitches, getting you back to your routine in less than 48 hours. This summer, look and feel your best with Air Sculpt. 6440 Wasatch Boulevard, conveniently located right here in Salt Lake City. Book your free virtual or in-person consultation at airsculpt.com/iHeart.
Hi, this is Bryce Abel. I'm the producer of Dark Skies, the co-author of AD After Disclosure, and you are listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So forgive me, Gerald O'Hara, for interrupting you in the middle of your statement.
All right.
But you used the S word, scandal.
Right.
What, pray tell, was that?
In 1960, the editor of Psychic Observer, Tom O'Neill, and a psychic researcher, Professor Andrei Pruharich, went to Camp Chesterfield, requested permission of the board to film physical seances. These facts are well known in a way. And they filmed 5 seances in June of 1960. And it became apparent on the first occasion that actors were coming into the seance. These were filmed in infrared, right? So the lights are off, but the cameras are on, filming in infrared. And out from behind the seance cabinet, there's a door, and through that door is emerging actors dressed up. What happened was that they were able to identify the actors who were pretending to be spirits. And it's incontrovertible that it was filmed, and the editors were able to identify the actors as well. So the editor of Psychic News, who's an honorable man and truth is important, put it onto the front page of Psychic Observer, which was the newspaper which he edited. And of course, it was a huge scandal. Those facts are well known and they're easily found on the internet. What is not known is the background story and the aftermath to that story, because every story has a backstory, doesn't it? And those were not known. So through my research, I was able to establish that the leading actors, which was Edith Stilwell, Homer Watkins, Mabel Riffle, who was the executive secretary of Camp Chesterfield, Hannah Pruharich, and others. There were 5 other people. 5 people were involved altogether, and they were proven to be, back through the 1950s, through letters, to have been proven frauds. Real life is not black and white. Now, if you go back into the life of these people, say Mabel Riffle was acknowledged to be a very powerful, independent, direct voice and trumpet medium. Homer Watkins, aka Homer Simpson, not really, was also a powerful direct voice medium. So the mediums involved in the fraud actually had a history of being genuine, but they were getting older, they were losing their powers, so they had resorted to fraud. The principal villain in this was a woman called Edith Stilwell. Well, there are letters from the late 40s and 1950s. The fraud occurred in 1960, remember, that clearly demonstrated that those people who'd sat with her were completely convinced that they had witnessed the materialization of people that they knew in spirit. So, over a 10-year period, their powers had waned and they had resorted to fraud. Real life is not black and white, so it's not that they were always fraud and this is what they always had done. It was that they had gradually developed fraud because they hadn't wanted to give up the income or disappoint the public. Mabel Riffle, the executive secretary of Camp Chesterfield, is on record as saying that unless the phenomena was demonstrated, people wouldn't come to Chesterfield and that Chesterfield would fail. The consequences of the scandal are also interesting to explore because the actual damage of the scandal without research appears to be horrific, but in fact it wasn't. The American spiritualist movement was probably was split between, say, 12 to 13 groups which claimed to be national. The biggest was always the National Spiritualist Association of Churches, the NSAC. But there were other groups. they could ignore what was going on in somebody else's backyard. One of my colleagues in historical research is Pete Nicol, who lives at Camp Chesterfield still, and he produced a book called Chesterfield Expose, which is on eBay, Chesterfield Expose on eBay, and he reproduced the letters that went into Psychic Observer, which discusses the impact of the scandal on the American public. It's an informal survey, sure, this is not the American public appalled by the behavior of the senior people at Camp Chester, absolutely appalled. The national organizations, 12 to 13 national organizations, most of them just ignored it. It's going to go away. The International Psychic Press, there was Chimes in California, which was a national newspaper of the time. They just ignored it. Nobody wanted to know. So actually, when you start to research, the impact of this scandal actually proves to be a lot more limited than one would think. As I was saying, there was an aftermath. The organization that a lot of apart from the Indiana Association of Spiritualists, some of the characters belong to a group, the Universal Spiritualist Association of America, the USA, and their mediums were connected with the fraud at Camp Chesterfield, and they perpetrated fraud in other churches outside of Camp Chesterfield. So there was a network. Mabel Riffle, in print, said that she would break the Psychic Observer, and she did. The scandal was posted on the front page in July 10th, 1960, and the newspaper ceased publication in January of 1961. Hey, it had been failing for some years, to be honest. So it wasn't entirely down to Mabel. People were losing interest, basically. So the paper did actually fail, and it was partially as a result of Mabel's saying so, because churches who were associated with Camp Chesterfield, who were members of the Universal Spiritualist Association, withdrew their subscriptions. The weakness of the Psychic Observer as a newspaper was that it relied on personal subscriptions, church subscriptions. It didn't have a national distributor that would put it on railway station platforms, bus stations. Those kind of approaches were common in the United Kingdom, which is a much smaller country. But the newspaper would have had to indemnify the wholesale distributor, which it couldn't do in the United States without losing a lot of money. So the newspaper was relying on personal subscriptions. It was reliant on church subscriptions and advertisers. When the scandals blew up on the newspaper, it was on the newspaper We Are in Mourning. This was the front page, 10th July 1960. We are in mourning, it said. And the paper lost support of churches that had no connection with the scandal whatsoever, because they didn't want their congregations reading of scandal within the church.
We'll hear more about the reactions to the scandal with Gerald. Gene and Tim, you're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Sun's out, body out. No matter how many push-ups or macros you count, sometimes stubborn fat won't budge. And weight loss meds may help you lose weight, but won't get your ideal shape. Enter Air Sculpt. Minimally invasive Air Sculpt permanently removes fat without needles, scalpels, or stitches, getting you back to your routine in less than 48 hours. This summer, look and feel your best with Air Sculpt. 6440 Wasatch Boulevard, conveniently located right here in Salt Lake City. Book your free virtual or in-person consultation at airsculpt.com/iHeart.
Welcome back to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
So we're picking up on that, continuing on the scandal and the impact in different ways. Nobody wants to hear about a scandal in the church.
That's right. So a lot of churches just backed off, dropped their subscription, and the newspaper Psychic Observer folded in 1961. But the scandal, the fraud, did continue, but it was limited to the Universal Spiritualist Association, where you can demonstrate that some of their mediums continue to practice fraud. In 1967, a man called Lamar Keene split up with his lover in Florida at the Tampa Church. And Lamar Keene wrote a book which came out in 1976 called Psychic Mafia. And he details the processes and the methods of fraud which had gone on within his network of churches. What Lamar Keene did was paint a very broad picture. He'd become a born-again Christian, so his agenda was to paint the entire spiritualist movement as fraudulent. Well, had he actually been specific, he would have been more effective. But his broad brush approach made it a weaker argument, because you could demonstrate that this guy who made outlandish claims of being an international medium, who was known throughout the United States, well, actually none of that was true at all. But you can actually demonstrate where he had spent his life, which was in the Universal Spiritualist Association and at various churches and locations. Even some of those churches within the Universal Spiritualist Association were not part of the fraud. Some of the church elders in different churches wrote and complained of fraud, and there was pressures from senior clergy to participate in the fraud, and there were pressures, financial pressures, and blackmail, basically, to do so. So what you can demonstrate was that whilst fraud did exist, it actually was quite limited. People will vote with their feet if they become aware that this is not genuine, then they will walk away. So Lamar Keene has never actually been looked at in the context in which he operated. What Spiritualism scandal does is actually look at his life in the context. So there we are. That was my latest book, Spiritualism Scandal.
You know, when you're talking about scandal, let me just bring up something from the pop culture and we'll get back to it. One of the things I think of when you mention a scandal about fake psychics in general, the movie Ghost. Do you remember that movie?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so we have Oda Mae Brown, portrayed by Whoopi Goldberg, who I think won Best Supporting for that. And she's a fake psychic, except for this Sam Wheat, who is murdered and becomes a ghost. He's murdered by Tony Goldwyn, by the way. And that man is the grandson of the other Goldwyn. You know, he's royalty in show business. Anyway, he is trying to figure out his predicament as a ghost. And Oda Mae Brown, after faking it for so many years, can hear and see him. The joke was on her.
Yes, it was rather. It's a great film, that. We still watch it when it comes up.
And it's interesting here to show you about talent. That movie was directed by one of the 3 people who directed that crazy comedy movie Airplane. That was probably the best comedy ever made.
Yes, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. So one of those directors, Mr. Zucker, was the director of Ghosts. Anyway, I just bring that out because I guess there's a general perception here that the psychic down the street, and there is a psychic down the street here from where I live, the psychic down the street is just somebody taking your money and doing cold readings and nothing is real. How do you deal with that if you feel there are real psychics?
Well, we're not. There's a big difference between the United States and Britain. For one thing, it's a far smaller country. Over here, there's an idea that the American spiritualist movement, because it's a big country, was a lot bigger spiritualist movement than the United Kingdom. Gene, there is no evidence whatsoever for that. So hang on to your seat. The British spiritualist movement and the American spiritualist movement were roughly the same. Now, you can't be specific because you can never quantify the independence. And it's the independent churches, Arthur Ford called them kitchenette churches. That's the psychic down the road that you're referring to, who pop up, open a church because you get tax breaks, you become a minister, so you get some kind of protection under the Constitution, etc. And off you go, So there are lots of independence in the United States, always has been. But you look back at 1930s, the mid-1930s, which is something I can quantify in both countries, the movements were the same size. The difference being that Britain is a far smaller country. The difference culturally was huge. In Britain, the British developed a culture of service because no one was getting paid. I live in Yorkshire, and today, Yorkshire in the spiritualist world is divided between North Yorkshire, South Yorkshire. In my area, North Yorkshire, there's maybe 13 spiritualist churches. In South Yorkshire, there's maybe another 13 spiritualist churches. In independence, probably 6 to 8, shall we say. So within that area, which is probably the size of, let's say between Phoenix and Tucson, down to the Mexican border. Within that area, you've probably got anything up to 30 to 35 churches. That means that people will serve voluntarily for the spirit of doing so. So you don't get a lot of bogus psychics in this field because, hey, you can walk down the road, go to a church and get a message, and you can link with a genuine spiritualist medium in so doing. So culturally, the American and British spiritualist movements developed quite differently. This is all original research that I did, by the way. Also, within Britain, you had a lot of research societies, psychical research societies, who were not religious as such, but were looking at spiritualism from a point of view of scientific proof. There were colleges. There are less colleges nowadays, certainly, but probably in the 1930s, you had maybe 10 societies throughout the United Kingdom. You maybe had another 10 different types of colleges offering training programs. The capacity of the psychics, much more limited in this country, and the culture was quite different. Therefore, in America, a pastor would start a church who would attract a congregation, and the congregation would generate an income. and possibly even a community like Ethel Post Parrish or Reverend Dorothy Graff Flexer in Florida, in Sarasota.
Take a pause that refreshes here, my friend, and then we'll get back to Gerald O'Hara, Tim Swartz, Gene Steinberg, talking about spiritualist movements, spiritualist churches. More to come. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Sun's out, body out. No matter how many push-ups or macros you count, sometimes stubborn fat won't budge. And weight loss meds may help you lose weight, but won't get your ideal shape. Enter Air Sculpt. Minimally invasive Air Sculpt permanently removes fat without needles, scalpels, or stitches, getting you back to your routine in less than 48 hours. This summer, look and feel your best with Air Sculpt. 6440 Wasatch Boulevard, conveniently located right here in Salt Lake City. Book your free virtual or in-person consultation at airsculpt.com/iHeart.
This is Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report, and you're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
From a neophyte, which is what I am not as well educated on spiritualism as you and Tim. Just looking at it in general, a spiritualist church, how does that compare with a church of another type, like a normal Christian church or a Jewish synagogue, or for example?
I would like to hear Tim on this one, because the British spiritualist movement developed a culture of we don't have any doctrines, we don't have any dogmas, you don't have to subscribe to belief systems, so it's based on experience. The British movement has a set of principles, 7 in our case, and I believe it's 8 in the NSAC. So it's within a framework of those principles, you can pretty much believe what you want. You may not actually be able to teach it on the platform, though. I have certain principles that, for example, reincarnation. The British movement, but it takes no view on it. So you don't promote it and you don't deride it, because it's a matter of personal belief. It takes a church format in that there is opening prayers, there are hymns, there's messages whereby the mediums will communicate with the spirit world, and there's also a lesson or Sunday address. In order to qualify as a spiritualist medium in Great Britain, and I believe in the United States as well, you have to you train in these different abilities, in these different arts, and I have a CSNU, which is in public speaking, in fact, but you can go on and do diplomas and become a minister and things like that. How is it in Indiana?
Well, in the United States, it's very similar to the way that you described it. And I will acknowledge it's been years since I have been to a spiritualist church, but it can be practically the same as, going down to your local Methodist church. Like you said, I mean, it starts out, with hymns and a service, and there is an acknowledgement with a lot of these churches of the same kind of Christian tenets. The acknowledgement of Jesus as a savior, but there's also talk of other past spiritual leaders of various kinds, with Jesus being, at the top rung of the ladder, so to speak. But like you said, there are then readings, to various people in the congregation, more songs, things like that. Now, I think that a lot of people whose knowledge only comes from, like, say, television or something like that, thinks that there are seances and materializations in your normal weekly spiritualist churches. That's not the case. Though that's saved for other times.
Those kind of events, those seances, tend to be off the record or invitation only, because you have to know who's coming to them.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to be confident about the people there. How common is physical mediumship in Indiana?
Not very much anymore.
No. I wonder why.
It's well, I think that it's now, like we were talking about Shannon Taggart's book Seance. It surprised me that there were more of these events taking place than I realized that she attended and photographed. But it's not as common as it was, say, in the early 1900s, like during World War I, and then the other resurgence during World War II, naturally. But then after that, there was a slow decline, and I do think that after the whole Camp Chesterfield, then it kind of went underground, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's right. My impression is that the physical mediumship aspect of spiritualism was a movement of its time, for its time, because the era in which it seemed to come to the fore, which was between the wars, and with that generation, needed that reassurance from the spirit world. Do you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely.
People ask, why is it gone? Where's it gone?
Yeah. Well, and that was that's one of the things that Gene was asking about, the difference between, say, like your typical Christian church or even a synagogue, and the spiritualist church. The spiritualist church has it's just right up front with the belief. Their faith is that there is an afterlife, that when you leave the physical coil, that your consciousness continues on and you can communicate with the world of the living.
Right. It's an interesting that you use the word faith, because I would argue that spiritualism is less of faith and more of an experience.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's,
right.
yeah. That, the readings and the seances are an example of that experience.
Absolutely. For example, in physical mediumship, everybody experiences the same thing. With our friend Stuart Alexander, who's coming to my house next week, you can see a trumpet fly into the air. Stuart wears tags on his luminescent tag, because it's dark, right? So there's 2 on his knees, 2 on the elbows, and he's tied into his chair. And you can see these trumpets, sometimes 2 will fly, sometimes only 1, and they'll take off and they will fly around the room. We've got a Victorian house, so it's got a very high ceiling. There's 15 people in our little seance room, and there's no way a human being could reach and stretch to that height. And it has a table. It's a glass top table, which they cover. They've got a red light bulb under it, and they put a cloth on, which is clear, so you can see through the light, just to soften it a bit, And you can literally see a cloud form on this table, and from out of that cloud will emerge a hand. And according to the spirit materializing that hand, it will be different. So if you've been a coal miner, as a friend of ours' father was, it'll be massive. But if it's your child, it'll be tiny. And we've felt similar hands and physical contact with David Thompson and with Scott Milligan. And that kind of thing, that is experience-based. And that kind of thing changes your life. That kind of experience is unique. When you talk to your mother after she's died 6 years ago, you talk to your mother, it just alters your life. So it ceases to be an experience, ceases to be a belief. It becomes an experience. So don't believe in the spirit world. We know it's an imminent reality around us. We can physically touch and contact it. Okay. Yeah, so it becomes less of a belief and more of an experience. So religion becomes based in experience. And that is a crucial difference with the churches, the conventional churches, which don't offer that. Those kind of experiences have become increasingly rare, but nevertheless, they are still out there. Some people think it will come back. Maybe it will, I don't know.
I know we have Gerald O'Hara with us, Tim Swartz and Gene Steinberg, whoever he is. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
It's sleeveless season. You diet, you work your tries, but you're still not ready. Stubborn fat used to be a challenge before AirSculpt, a minimally invasive procedure developed by a celebrity cosmetic surgeon over a decade ago. This innovative method permanently removes stubborn fat from chin to ankle without needles, scalpels, or stitches. Be your best self in less than 48 hours. Want all the right curves in all the right places? Visit airsculpt.com/iHeart to book an in-person or virtual consultation.
This is Jacques Vallée. You're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Gerald, that's an interesting thing here. The indication I had there is that there are fewer spiritualist churches. That's true about religious institutions in general. So are people basically deserting traditional beliefs?
I think spiritualist churches and conventional churches have declined. Even though they're all offering some different belief system or even experience in our case, nevertheless, the young are not attracted to it in the same as they were once. There's an interesting difference between the United States and Britain, is that Britain is a much more secular country than the United States is. Here, it's rare for people to have a church belief, whereas in America, in our experience, most people seem to belong to some church or other, but not so here. Britain is a very secular country. The Church of England, which of course is the state religion in Great Britain, has evaporated in the last 70 years. Its attendance is, churches are just shut all over the country. Funnily enough, I live in a wonderful medieval city of York, and the Minster, which is the cathedral in York, it's one of the biggest in Europe, a huge medieval Gothic cathedral. It is packed. It is packed, because they offer a kind of experience of religion that's you just don't get in the empty parish churches. So people are happy to go to, say, a lovely choral evening song, where you get 30 choristers of different ages all singing in the medieval choir. And so But generally speaking, the churches have declined in Great Britain. I would think to an extent much greater than in the United States, even though we have a state religion. And there is a move, really, to disestablish the Church of England, because it's out of date. It's a museum culture, really.
Are you able to address the beginnings of the whole spiritualism movement, say, like with the Fox sisters in the United States?
And my field more is in the 20th century, because the 19th century, there's a group in Seattle called the International Association for the Preservation of Spiritualist and Occult Publications. My God, couldn't they have thought of something shorter than that? IAPSOP. And if you're interested in historical research, these wonderful people have done is digitize 19th century Americans' spiritualist and occult publications. IAP, SOP. Mark Dermarest is the chief spokesperson for that group. They have preserved 19th century publications in the United States and in other countries. And they've also recently finally got most of Psychic Observer from 1938 up to 1960, and that is digitized too. So if you're interested in 19th century American spiritualism, go to IAPSOP in Seattle. The 19th century field is very well covered, and there's lots of feminists are interested in it because it uniquely empowered women in a way that other movements did not. A woman, through the spiritualist movement in the 19th century in the United States and in the United Kingdom, could stand on the platform in deep trance and channel men. This was beyond shocking in the 19th century, even just to stand up in public, let alone channel male figures. So the spiritualist movement was quite radical in the 19th century. It allied itself with other progressive movements, the suffrage movement for women, the feminist movement for women, and of course the emancipation of the slave movement. And in America, the slavery issue catalyzed everything. Everything eventually coalesced around this one issue. And the spiritualist movement grew alongside that movement. The American movement was eventually, spiritualism in a way is regarded in Great Britain as an American movement because it came from America to Britain. And it was brought over to the United Kingdom by a man called David Richmond, who was a cobbler, somebody who repaired shoes. And he traveled over the United States. He was a radical socialist. He came back and he brought spiritualism to this country. And it developed and grew in the north of England, in particular amongst the working class communities, because they weren't tied to class distinctions that people of a higher class were. They could be more free of thought in their own thought and their own way of religion because they didn't matter to higher class people. The American mediums traveled to London in particular, and spiritualism, ironically, became fashionable in society in the south of England, but it became fashionable also in the working class in the north of England. And spiritualism in the north of England is still very strong. I was about the number of churches in the greater Yorkshire area, but you've also got Lancashire, Liverpool area, Cheshire, and if you take the whole of the north of England, which is maybe 200 miles across, there's probably anything up to 100 plus churches plus independents in that area still, even though we have seen decline over the last 30 years with the loss of churches. Nevertheless, it's still very strong in the north of England, and it came over from America. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought, Gene. We were talking about the Fox sisters, weren't we? There's several good books on Fox sisters.
Well, you were talking about like how spiritualism was part of like the feminist movement, but I mean in the 19th century, not 19th century, the 20th century, you see that as well. But most of the greatest mediums were women and were free to be, like you said, be up there talking and preaching. That's probably not the correct word, when more traditional churches would never have allowed that. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, in the early 20th century, I mean, spiritualism was way ahead of its time.
I would there is the spiritualist movement was very progressive in the 19th century. I did a study. How I got into spiritualist history was when I became secretary. Into my hands came 3 minute books of the committee for the York Church between 1899, when the church was started, and 1929. Through those minute books, I was able to quantify the participation of women in the church, both at executive level and as speakers, and it consistently showed that 65% of participation at different levels of the movement was women, and that included physical mediums as well. So, yes.
So, yes, we will find out more about that. We're talking to Gerald O'Hara, who's been following spiritualists for quite a long time, written a number of books on the subject. I am learning lots from this guy, because it's not something that I've explored very deeply, but Tim Swartz has. And so there you go. I'm Gene Steinberg. It means you're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
It's sleeveless season. It's time to reach your body goals and achieve the shape you've always wanted, all thanks to this minimally invasive procedure that uses no needles, no scalpels, and no stitches. With AirSculpt, you can permanently remove that stubborn body fat anywhere in your body and be back to your daily routine in no time. Get ready to conquer the summer. Visit airsculpt.com/iHeart to book your complimentary virtual or in-person consultation now. That's airsculpt.com/iHeart.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our famous Paracast community forums at forum.theparacast.com.
So let me ask you a question, Gerald O'Hara. In exploring spiritualism, spiritualist churches, mediums, have you had personal experiences of note that lead you one way or the other?
Oh, sure. I mentioned speaking to my mother. That's you never forget. You never forget that, And she asked about my partner and the guy that gave me my childhood address. About in the mid-1990s, through Colin Fry, Eric, my partner, and I went down to the south of England where we sat with Colin Fry, which we did several times. And Eric had an asthma attack and had to leave, and the seance was stopped. And I was asked to go and sit in his chair, which was in the inner circle, which is a seat of privilege. And sure enough, the guides came through. At that time, we didn't have the York Spiritualists didn't have their own building, and we were meeting in community hall. And I was given this seat of privilege, and various people came through and spoke to me because I was the secretary of the York Spiritualist Centre at that time. And Gordon Higginson, who was the president of Spiritualist National Union for over 20 odd years, he came through and he said, we would get our own building. It would be within the year, and he couldn't be there, but he would be there in spirit. And had he been able to be there personally and physically present, he would have been happy to have dedicated the centre for us. Leslie Flint, who was a famous direct voice medium, known as Flinty to those who knew him. We never actually met him. He came through and he gave us his blessing and also spoke of the church that was to come. And sure enough, it all happened within the year. And we did have a big dedication ceremony with 100 people there and various worthies of the Spiritualist National Union. And on that occasion, our first circle leader, who was called Marjorie, she materialized and she came over to me, calling me Jerry. Well, I was never called Jerry except by Marjorie. And she traced out she took the palm of my hand in her hand, a materialized palm, and she traced out the initials of the letters of her name as Marjorie. And in 30 years of seances, I think I've witnessed many materializations, but I've only twice had personal communications from myself. That was about 1996, 97, when Gordon Higginson and Marjorie materialized and spoke to me. And much later through Scott Milligan, when my mother materialized and we had a conversation. So those kind of wonderful occasions you never forget, really. But I've been very privileged to be able to experience so many things through David Thompson, Colin Fry, Stuart Alexander, Scott Milligan, and people of that ilk. The genuine thing.
Can you describe what it's like to experience any of this? What do you feel? Do you feel a force taking over? Please be specific.
Yeah, it's thrilling. It is literally thrilling because the spirit vibration is faster than us. It's a heightened sense of awareness that you're with these beings temporarily, and it's so natural when it occurs. You may know of Dr. Henry Slade. He was a 19th century American medium, and there was a lot of he came to Britain. He was charged with vagrancy, and he appeared in court. There was just a knock on the floor there. You must know I'm speaking about him. And Dr. Henry Slade and I wrote an account of his trial. He was charged with vagrancy and he was expelled from the country. And he went back from England. And he had a rather tragic end as a drunk. Before he died, the spiritualist took care of him. Provided him with a sanatorium which saw him to the end of his life, and the spiritualist doctors were with him when he was close to dying. Before he died, he was an alcoholic, dementia by then. He sat up in his bed and personally thanked each one of the doctors for the care that they had given to him, and he materialized at a York seance and he spoke to me about that article. And it kind of takes your breath away. Oh my God. And he said to me, "Young man, this is not as easy as you think," which rather put me in my place because I'd suggested that he was coming through. Come on, it's easy, you know. And he corrected me that it wasn't as easy as I thought it was. And I spoke to Gordon Higginson, who was president of the union, on another occasion as well. And he told me that materializing his voice was actually a very difficult process. But on another occasion, Dodi Al-Fayed materialized through David Thompson. And of course, Dodi Al-Fayed was the lover of Princess Diana and died in the tragic car crash in Paris. Dodi Al-Fayed said to us, it was an accident. It was an accident. It was quite clear. And he did bring through Diana, but she wasn't able to speak. It was rather sad. But when you hear something like that coming from spirit, it's so persuasive of conviction. It's like nothing else. And we've experienced this many times. Over to you, Gene.
Well, no, I'm just thinking here. Do you feel that you're being taken over by something when this happens? I'm trying to understand the effect.
No, not at all. No, not at all. You're aware if they're touching you or speaking to you, you're aware in a heightened sense of awareness that they're with you, that you are present in something that is extraordinary. And afterwards, it's like, no. It's hard to describe the kind of sense of elation that you felt at that time. It's almost addictive. Tom Newman, who Tim was in touch with, he says he's an ectoplasmic junkie because the heightened sense of awareness that you have from being in these elevated presences is really extraordinary and life-changing, literally.
I want to discuss the mechanism here. Is this something that anyone could do, or must you have special abilities?
No, it is thought that the physical aspect of mediumship is to do with something unique to certain physiologies. I haven't got it. My partner and I, we sit for independent direct voice, and we've been sitting for 30 years, and we hope to get it yet, but we haven't got it. Very few people. But
you are discussing experiences you've had. This is not something that you generated, or what?
No, it's an experience we've had with other people. And years ago, 70 years ago, they were far more common than they are now. So we've been lucky. But it's something about certain types of individuals who have this etheric body, it's understood, that can be manipulated to create physical effects in the room that are objective and witnessed by everybody.
You know what? We've got Gerald and Gene and Tim with more. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Inside every California avocado is a story. It's shaped by idyllic conditions, full of rich soil, gentle rain, and friendly California sunshine, where avocados flourish. Crafted with care by dedicated local farmers who are committed to responsible, sustainable growing. The best avocados have California in them. To understand why, all you have to do is open one up. In season now. Visit CaliforniaAvocado.com to learn more.
Hi, it's Grant Cameron from PresidentialUFO.com. You're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Gerald, I just want to get more involved here. So is this ability something you're born with? Is it something that you have to be born with it? You can't have something within you that you train. You have to either have it or not.
You have to train it. Definitely. No doubt there are many people who have this ability who are not aware of it or have it random and spontaneously occur around them, but have never actually developed it. There was, I remember a quotation from the 1870s that said that physical materialization was an ancient art practiced. People call a modern medium an ancient medium, ancient spiritualism, modern spiritualism. But I lost my train of thought there. Nevertheless, some people are born with this ability, but you have to train it. For example, David Thompson, who lives in New Zealand these days, it took him 6 years to develop physical mediumship. If you haven't got it physiologically, you can't develop it. You haven't got it. I don't have it. I am a medium myself, and I do platform work myself, and I am a mental medium, and they are able to influence my mental processes to convey information to me. I don't hear voices very well, but I'm trying to develop that. So mental mediumship can be developed by anyone. If you're willing to put in the devotion and the time it takes to develop these things, you can learn to appreciate music if you're willing to put in the time. But physical mediumship is quite different. Physical mediumship is physiological, and it's unique to some people. And it seems to be even rare. Well, it certainly is much rarer now than it ever was before. Interestingly enough, I did research into British physical mediumship, and I would think between, say, 1918 to 1988, we maybe had, 12 to 15 physical mediums who could do direct voice and materialization. Though I could name names, but you go to America, it's almost like 200, about the same size. That's interesting. And in the appendices to Psychic Observers, I actually listed all the physical mediums who had direct voice and trumpet mediumship. I listed, what did I say earlier, 167, was it? Well, you could probably add far more onto that. So it was all physical in America, but whereas it wasn't in this country. The British newspaper editor Maurice Barbanel traveled to the States in the 1930s, and he said Britain, this is a headline in the British Psychic News, which is still going, and he wrote that we have the teachers, meaning the British, we have the master teachers, America has the mediums. I think nowadays it's almost reversed. The good mediums seem to be coming from Britain to America, whereas the American mediums seem to be fewer on the ground. I'm not entirely sure why that is the case, but or perhaps I'm just playing wrong. What do you think, guys?
I don't understand it. I think if somebody has an ability, it shouldn't matter where they live. They have an ability.
Well, it also depends on the culture around you, doesn't it? You know, if we've got, say, 40 spiritualist churches in a very small area of Yorkshire as a whole, that gives you much more opportunity and much more exposure to developing those gifts. Whereas if you live in, say, Tucson, how many churches are there in your region?
Probably none anymore.
No? There used to be some in Phoenix that I knew of historically. If you look at, say, California in 1960, let's say 1960, there was, in the whole of California, let's say there was 115 churches. Majority them around the Los Angeles area. You go to Oregon, you go to Washington, and you get clusters of churches around Portland and Seattle. And you get some in San Francisco, notably the Golden Gate Spiritualist Church in San Francisco, which I have been to. How many churches are left? I know San Bernardino has a venerable church, which is still going because I've had some contact there with them. And that's quite an old church. And no doubt there are others. But there aren't many. So not having the culture around you probably reduces the impact of that way of life on you.
Well, and of course, in the United States, you have a lot of areas where certain Christian churches are predominant, and anything that even close to hinting of spiritualism is considered evil, demonic, of Satan, things like that. So if you have, say, a youngster who has these types of untrained abilities, and the only thing around them, is churches calling you evil, then it's not going to get developed.
No, that's true enough. I think about 1950, 13 church states in the Union didn't have any spiritualist churches at all listed. What you go by, it was the newspaper Psychic Observer and Chimes. If you look at, there was a church group called the Spiritualist Episcopal Church. There was another one, of course, the NSAC, which is and was the biggest. There was also IGAS, International General Assembly of Spiritualists. And there was another group called General Assembly of Spiritualists, rather confusingly. There was IGAS and GAS. And they had no representation in the Southern Bible Belt at all. Probably there were, some independents down there. So as we were saying earlier, the spread of spiritualism in the United States was pretty patchy, really. It was mostly concentrated around the New England states and the Great Lakes, going down to as far south as St. Louis, as the Americans say, and in the Midwest as well, where our friend Tom is in New Mexico. There was a church in Albuquerque, that was it. There was a church up in Colorado, that was it. There were whole areas where there was no spiritualism, but you get clusters where it was very strong as well. So it'd be interesting. The biggest issue as a researcher is how big was the American spiritualist movement in the mid-20th century? That issue, that's the thing that interests me most as a researcher. And my research shows that the American movement, the British movement, were roughly the same size, which in, say, 1960 was probably about 600 churches, concentrated around Great Lakes and in California in the West.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask you a question, and then we'll pick up on the other side of the segment. And that is it because fewer people in a specific area have abilities, or they have abilities, but they don't consider the option of working together with the church? They are lone wolves or simply don't want to develop their abilities for whatever reason. That's something we'll explore in our next segment. We have Gerald O'Hara, we have Tim Swartz, we have Gene Steinberg, and I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, I have no spiritualist ability. I am not a medium. I am not a psychic. But some people, of course, will say not psychic, psycho, but I will not comment on that. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Inside every California avocado is a story. It's shaped by idyllic conditions, full of rich soil, gentle rain, and friendly California sunshine, where avocados flourish. Crafted with care by dedicated local farmers who are committed to responsible, sustainable growing. The best avocados have California in them. To understand why, all you have to do is open one up. In season now. Visit CaliforniaAvocado.com to learn more.
This is Jennifer Stein, executive producer of The Disclosure Dialogues. You're listening to The Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So, Gerald, you got the question I asked there. Is it a matter of the same number of people having abilities as always and not wanting to get together with others? Or is it specifically the fact that, for whatever reason, fewer people are developing the abilities or fewer people who are aware of them pursue it?
It's hard to say, isn't it, really? It just seems to have gone out of vogue. It went out of vogue from the 1960s onwards, really. The movement was faltering in the 1950s, but like any movement, it continues to exist in certain areas. In the 1930s, spiritualism was avant-garde. Everyone was really interested in it. It was the real buzz. But it lost that after World War II. And people, the consumer society of the 1950s, people just developed different interests. If they were aware of the psychic aspects of their lives, they weren't pursuing it to the same extent. There's always going to be people who are interested in developing these abilities because they are natural and inherent to who we are as a species. It's just human nature that we have these things and we can develop them. But the great question why people don't is unknowable, of course. Certainly it is to do with the culture around you promoting these things, like it was in my family, so I knew about it, even though it was hush-hush and not discussed. But if it's not there, and you don't live in that part of the world where it's practiced, maybe you don't come across it. If it's demonized, you stay away from it. People believe what they're told, don't they? Can I raise a different topic?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've written 4 books in the series Spiritual Mediumship in America, which specializes in American mediumship in the 20th century, which, as I say, is a new topic. And I'm going to write another book, which will be biographies. And on my desk here, I have the handsome face of James Lawton. Jimmy Lawton was born in Manitoba in Canada. 1911, was it, Jimmy? And died in 2000 in Detroit. He moved to Michigan and was sponsored, as people were, to become American citizens by 2 sisters who were connected with Camp Chesterfield. He worked there for many years, from 1940 right up to 1960. He kind of disappeared. Well, he did disappear. There are various reasons for that. I was able to contact Jimmy Lawton's family. Jimmy never married, and he lived outside of Detroit. And he died in 2000. Now, what is known about his post-1960 life, which was 40 years, right, was that he didn't get involved with the churches, but that he taught and practiced mediumship privately. So he must have had quite a good practice in order to maintain a lifestyle. His archives, his family told me, were ransacked after he died. So there is very little physical material left about him. If anybody out there knows anything about James Lawton, please do contact me. My email address is historymedium, all one word, lowercase, historymedium@yahoo.com. Jimmy Lawton emerged in the late 1930s as an independent direct voice medium. And what they did was they constructed a cabinet, a wooden cabinet, total blackout inside. Jimmy went inside the cabinet. They had megaphones attached to the cabinet, and he sat at Camp Chesterfield between 1940 and, say, 1957, and he broadcast independent direct voice to the people in the audience in broad daylight. He wasn't in broad daylight, but they were. And there was personal messages, and famous mediums would come through and they would talk. He was the sensation of the day, James Lawton, and quite a handsome fella. And after 1957, he moved away from the spiritualist movement directly. There are various reasons for that, which I do know about. But his subsequent life is not known. So if anybody out there knows anything of James Lawton, I would be very pleased to hear from them. So James Lawton is going to be one of my topics for the next book. And he was a materializing medium. A man called Alder Madison Wade wrote a wonderful book about his materialization seances, which he gave in Detroit in the late 1940s, Evidences of Immortality. It's still available. You can still find it on the internet. So James Lawton, anybody, if anyone knows anything about him. And he's part of the Mediumship in America series available on Amazon. Thank you. That little plug.
Do you know, did James Lawton do materializations in broad daylight, like he did the direct voice, or any information along those lines?
It was called a ruby light, which was a red light bulb, and he sat in red light, and he did it that way.
Which a lot of people still do today.
Well, I hope so, they do. If anybody out there is doing it, please invite me. I've yet to go to Chesterfield. I haven't been invited, though I have friends there. And after writing Spiritualism Scandal, maybe I won't be invited there. They have a wonderful library, museum, the J. Het Museum at Chesterfield, which I would love to see, and lots of Banks sister paintings there. So Chesterfield is well worth visiting. And as I was saying earlier, their archives are available online. There's lots of images that you can see there. Do you know anything of Charlie Swan? Charlie Swan died. Ooh,
no, not offhand.
1996, I think, something like that, maybe a little earlier. His wife, Pauline, only died in 2017. And he was a materializing medium.
I want to know more about the mechanism of this. Understand, Gerald, for people who aren't following spiritualism, mediums, these names you're dropping, they have no clue who they are or what their participation is.
Charlie Swan was a Camp Chesterfield medium. He was the cousin of Clifford Byers, who was a nationally famous medium. Charlie Swan was a materialization medium and direct voice, but hey, wasn't everyone. There were seances in which he could materialize tigers, which curled around the legs and purred of the sitters at seances. He was quite a developed medium and well known in his day, but he does seem to have been forgotten. And there is no biography of Charlie Swan. So if somebody wants to do one, there's plenty of material about him out there.
I'm interested in materializing animals and things like that, because certainly a tiger, I don't want to be near a tiger. He's just a tiger might look at me and say, lunch. So
I say tiger, actually, they didn't know what it was because it was in the dark, but it was a large cat. And it was quite well known that this creature would materialize and it would curl around your legs like a cat would. But obviously, there's no danger. You're not going to be injured and it would instantly disappear if anyone became frightened of the presence.
So it's basically an image, not a reality, although you can feel it.
Oh, no,
it's
around
physical, your leg, you feel
yeah.
it. It's physical.
Oh, yes, you can.
Okay.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Okay, let's hear more about this. Let's talk about the mechanism of mediumship. How about that? And we'll talk with Gerald and Jean and Tim. You're in
the Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
As the weather warms up, riders will be revving their engines and getting out on the open road. If you're a motorcycle enthusiast and have been injured by a negligent or distracted driver, you deserve an advocate. Calling the Utah Advocates won't cost you a dime. They'll take over the legal stress with the insurance company and fight for the compensation rightly owed to you. Call today and talk to your advocate, 801-355-5550, or chat online at utahadvocates.com. That's utahadvocates.com.
This is Jerome Clark, author of the UFO Encyclopedia and other books. You're listening to the Paracast.
So we have one more segment with Gerald O'Hara, and then he'll appear in the After the Paracast episode for subscribers of the Paracast Plus, where we'll get into more details. I'm trying to look at the mechanism of being a medium. So you talk about materialization, and you mentioned possibly a cat, but it wasn't seen. It's felt. It's dark, so you can't see a creature.
Yeah, it was felt. Apparently, its fur felt quite natural when they stroked it. A friend of ours, Brigitte, a French woman who owned cats that had died, she stroked her cats, materialized at a seance, but the fur felt different. It didn't feel like real cat fur. The cat curled around her legs, but it felt rougher and coarser than real cat fur did. But Charlie Swan's materialized cat, which was, a large creature, a puma, a jaguar, something like that, that did feel quite natural. And it had an odor as well. There was a medium, I've forgotten his name, Kluski, who's Polish. And between the wars, he gave seances in Warsaw and Paris. And on one occasion, he materialized an ape man who was, they used to talk about them, the missing link. And it was described as a missing link, whatever. We've moved on to understand hominid species nowadays. But this missing link stank to high heaven. That smelled absolutely foul. And it was known to have appeared on another occasion through Kluski. And again, it stank and it became its signature. Everybody was nauseated by the smell of this, quote, ape man. There was Kluski also materialized creatures like eagle, which was actually seen as well on that occasion because the eagle's obviously quite large birds. So animal realizations have been known to occur.
Now, when this happens and materialize, you mean you physically see it or just feel it? I'm just trying to clarify.
Well, it depends who the medium was. I believe in the case of Charlie Swan, they were felt and heard and smelt, but not actually seen. With Kluski, I believe they were seen in red light because I remember descriptions of the materialized eagle being described, but the overall, the nauseating smell of the hominid was apparently pretty powerful and pretty obnoxious as well. There's many such stories like that in the past. You know the story of Daniel Douglas Hume. He was an Edinburgh medium who became a medium in court circles in the mid-19th century. And on one occasion, he was said to have levitated in broad daylight out of one window on the first floor into the other window in the same room. And it was seen by several people to have done so. But he did materialization seances for Queen Victoria and for Tsar Alexander II in Russia, and he toured Europe giving Napoleon III and giving seances at courts. Of course, they couldn't own up and say that these things had happened, but nevertheless they did.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, they could go online and find there are a number of photographs that have been taken over the years, especially in the late 19th and early 20th century, with various investigators at these materialization seances, producing some absolutely incredible photographs of these materializations, not only in the United States, Great Britain, but Brazil as well.
I think Brazil's the biggest spiritualist country on the planet, isn't it? I know little about it, to be honest. I gather they don't do mediumship.
Yeah, it's called Spiritism there.
Do you know, Tim, what they do? From what I've heard, they do trance, but they don't do clairvoyance. But I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'm like you. I don't know a lot. I know that it's based on the works of, what was his name, Allan Kardec. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Right, and yeah, but it is. It's there's trance, there's the direct voice mediums, and then the people who do all of the above. The levitating and producing materializations and apports as well. I mean, that's something that we haven't discussed yet, because a lot of these people also, face it, like an 8-man or the Eagles or things like that. That's technically an apport that doesn't stay behind.
Yeah. Listen, I don't know if there are. I heard of Michael Shane, who lives in Alaska, I believe, and apparently he's an apport medium. But I know little about him, apart from the fact that he's reputed to be the son of, Keith Milton Reinhardt of Seattle, who was a 1950s and 60s materializing medium. And he did apports as well. There's the Aquarian Foundation, no definite article, the Aquarian Foundation, which is based out in Seattle. There's a number of organizations like that, isn't there, in the States? Richard Zeno has an organization in Los Angeles, the Akasha, AKASHA, and they keep his memory and his teachings alive. And there's a book you can get called Telephone to Another World. And Richard Zeno could, in deep trance, give messages in any language you can think of. And it was there's many examples in his books of spirits coming through, speaking any language that's been known on Earth to the recipients who replied in the same language. And Robert Cheney has a foundation also in Los Angeles as well that keeps his memory and his teachings alive. He was a psychic photographer and materializing medium and a direct voice medium as well. There seems to be several organizations within Los Angeles that keep the memory of certain mediums alive. I shall have to visit them.
Okay. At least I've learned a little bit about spiritualism and about mediums, and I've got some more things to ask you on the After the Paracast podcast for Paracast Plus listeners, so we'll get into that. Meantime, Gerald O'Hara, please tell our listeners where they could check out your work and find out more of what you do.
Oh, thank you. The series Mediumship in America is available on Amazon. The books are available there in Kindle format as well. The most recent one, as I was saying, was Spiritualism Scandal. There's Ethel Post Parrish, Psychic Observers, and I Come to the Garden. And they're all themed around mediumship in the mid-20th century. A new theme. Thank you, Gene.
You can find us on X, Threads, and Facebook. Look for The Paracast. Although they've messed it up royally, we still have an online store at theparacast.store. I mean, they really messed it up. We can do a show on that. Maybe for the tech show, we'll do it. We also offer the Paracast Plus at theparacast.plus, where you get this show without any network ads, whatever. We have less than we used to. You get none. And we also give you the special bonus after the Paracast podcast, where it goes on and you never know what's going to happen next, and we don't either. Check out the Paracast.plus, the Paracast.plus, for more information. Gerald O'Hara, glad to meet you. Thank you for joining us on the Paracast.
Thank you.
The Paracast, featuring Gene Steinberg, is a copyrighted presentation of Making the Impossible Incorporated. Tune in next week for a new adventure in The Paracast.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad. How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Oh, it's such a clutch pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom, too. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
The GOAT!
Go to Blinds.com for up to 45% off. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.